The city breathed its gray afternoon breath, a slow sigh of rain against the towering windows of the old city library. It was a place of quiet echoes, of dust motes dancing in the slants of weak light, a sanctuary for stories that were finished and waiting to be rediscovered. On the top floor, in the hushed canyon of the philosophy and history stacks, Luna moved with a quiet grace that belonged to this world of paper and ink. She was shelving books, her fingers tracing their spines with a natural reverence. At 24, her life had been one of quiet observation, of loving stories of grand passion but never having lived one herself. She was a virgin not just in body, but in the ways of the heart, a book everyone passed over without reading the first page. Downstairs, the heavy library doors whispered open, letting in a gust of damp, city-scented air. A man stepped inside, his entrance causing a subtle shift in the atmosphere. He was Asher, a man whose name was often printed in bold letters on business magazines, a man who commanded boardrooms and owned skyscrapers. But today he looked nothing like a billionaire. His expensive coat was damp, his dark hair tousled by the wind, and his eyes, a stormy shade of blue, held a weary exhaustion. He had slipped away from his security team, from the endless meetings, seeking the one thing his money couldn't easily buy: silence. He made his way up, floor by floor, leaving the buzz of the modern world behind, ascending towards the quietest, most forgotten part of the building. His polished shoes made no sound on the worn carpet. He turned a corner into a narrow aisle, and that's when he saw her. Luna was on her tiptoes, reaching for a high shelf, a precarious tower of heavy historical volumes balanced in her arms. Asher moved forward, perhaps to offer help, but his movement startled her. She turned, a small gasp escaping her lips, and the tower of books in her arms wobbled, then tumbled. A thick, leather-bound biography hit the floor with a loud thud that echoed in the silence. They both moved at once, bending down to retrieve it. His large, capable hand covered her smaller, delicate one on the book's cover. A jolt, simple and electric, passed between them. Luna's head snapped up, her wide, hazel eyes meeting his. She saw the tired lines around his eyes, the surprising depth in them, the way they weren't looking at her with the usual impatience or dismissal she sometimes encountered. Asher, for his part, was completely disarmed. He was used to being met with calculated smiles, with avarice or fear. He saw none of that in her face. He saw only a gentle surprise, and a kindness that felt like a warm light in the dim aisle. The scent of old paper and the faint, clean fragrance of her shampoo filled the space between them. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice as soft as the pages of the books surrounding them. "Don't be." His voice was a low rumble, unfamiliar in its gentleness. "It was my fault for startling you." He kept hold of the book, not yet ready to break the connection. "Plutarch's Lives," he read the title, a small smile touching his lips. "A bit heavy for a rainy afternoon, isn't it?" Luna smiled back, a real, unguarded smile that lit up her whole face. "I think it's the perfect weather for grand stories of the past," she said, finally pulling her hand away, feeling the ghost of his touch on her skin. "It reminds you that all this," she gestured vaguely around them, "the city, the noise, it's all just temporary. But the big questions, the big feelings? Those stay the same." Asher felt something shift inside his chest, a lock he didn't know was there beginning to turn. He was a man who dealt in permanence, in steel, glass, and contracts. Yet here was this woman, speaking of the temporary nature of his entire empire with a wisdom that humbled him. They talked then for what felt like both a moment and an eternity. He didn't mention his wealth. He talked about his love for history, for architecture, for the stories embedded in old stones. She spoke of her love for the library, for the quiet order of things, for the way a single sentence could change a person's entire day. He learned her name was Luna, and it suited her, a quiet light in a dark sky. She learned his was Asher, and he felt a strange need to earn the way she said it, without awe or expectation. He found himself telling her things he hadn't voiced to anyone. His loneliness at the top, the hollow feeling of a victory that only meant more numbers in a bank account. She listened, not as a fan or a critic, but as an equal, her eyes reflecting a deep understanding that soothed his weary soul. And as the rain slowed to a drizzle outside, Asher knew, with a certainty that was both thrilling and terrifying, that he was lost to her. This wasn't a business acquisition. This was a fundamental change in his universe. He looked at her, at the way a strand of her hair fell across her cheek, at the sincere curve of her mouth, and he knew he had to be completely, brutally honest. He couldn't offer her a courtship of lies or half-truths. The weight of his own intensity, the sheer magnitude of what he was already feeling, demanded a warning. He took a slow breath, his expression turning solemn. "Luna," he began, his voice low and serious, capturing her full attention. "I need to warn you about something." He paused, letting the gravity of his tone settle in the quiet space between them. "If you let me, I'll give you all 11 inches. Luna's breath hitched. A flush crept up her neck. Her mind, innocent as it was, jumped to the most obvious physical conclusion, and a wave of confusion and shock washed over her face. Seeing her reaction, Asher quickly clarified, his gaze unwavering, locked on hers. "It's not what you're thinking," he said softly. "I'm talking about the 11 inches between my head and my heart." He tapped his temple, then laid a hand over his chest. "It's the distance everything has to travel inside me. My thoughts, my fears, my dreams, my past, my future. When I care for someone, I care with all of it. It's intense. It's a lot. It's everything I am. And I'm warning you, I think I'm going to give it all to you." The silence that followed was profound. The library, the city, the world all seemed to fade away. Luna stared at him, her initial embarrassment melting into a awe so deep it was dizzying. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever offered her their entire being, flaws and all, with such raw, terrifying honesty. He wasn't promising her riches or an easy life. He was promising her the storm and the calm inside him. He was giving her a key to a vault no one else had ever been allowed to see. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild, hopeful drum. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear that she would turn and run. And in that moment, any fear she had evaporated. She felt not like a timid girl but like the brave heroines in the stories she loved. She took a small step closer, closing the physical distance between them, her hazel eyes shining with a newfound courage. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, her voice steady and clear. Those 3 words were his undoing. Asher let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin with an incredible tenderness. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. She rose onto her toes to meet him halfway. Their lips met in a kiss that was nothing short of a promise. It was gentle and searching, a soft sealing of the pact he had just proposed. It was the first taste of a love that was already destined to be vast and deep, a story just beginning its first beautiful chapter in the quiet heart of the library. The world outside the library seemed to have been remade in the soft, golden light of the days that followed. For Luna, the city was no longer a sprawling, anonymous place of gray stone and rushing strangers. It was a landscape painted with the colors of a new and thrilling affection. Asher, true to his word, began the deliberate and wondrous process of giving her those 11 inches. He did not do it with grand, flashy gestures designed for magazine spreads, but with quiet, focused attention that was meant for her eyes only. Their first official date was not at a 5-star restaurant, but on a worn blanket in the city's largest park, with a wicker basket containing sandwiches he had clumsily assembled himself and a bottle of lemonade. He watched, utterly captivated, as she laughed while trying to catch a ladybug on her finger, the sound a more beautiful melody than any he had ever heard in a corporate boardroom. He took her to a dusty, forgotten antique map store, and while she traced the faded coastlines of old worlds with her fingertip, he told her stories of the explorers who had dared to venture into the unknown, and she saw the same daring spirit alive in his eyes. Luna, in turn, began to map the territory of Asher's soul. She learned that his seriousness was not coldness, but a deep, focused intensity. She discovered the small, almost hidden smile that would appear at the corner of his mouth when she said something that genuinely delighted him. She saw the weight he carried, the invisible crown of responsibility that came with his empire, and she learned to gently lift it from his brow with a kind word or a simple, comforting touch. She introduced him to her world, the small, sun-drenched cafe where the barista knew her order, the tucked-away bookstore with a resident cat that slept in the poetry section. In these simple places, Asher felt more like a king than he ever had in his penthouse office. He was not a billionaire here. He was just a man, happily holding the hand of the woman who was slowly, surely becoming his entire world. The connection between them was a living thing, growing stronger and more intricate with every shared secret and every soft, lingering kiss goodbye at her doorstep. It was during one of these good nights, standing under the warm glow of the porch light of her small apartment building, that their intimacy deepened from emotional to physical. The air was cool, but the space between them was electric with warmth. They had been talking for an hour, neither wanting the evening to end. Asher leaned against the doorframe, his body a tall, solid shadow, while Luna stood before him, her face tilted up to his. Their conversation had lulled into a comfortable silence, filled only with the sound of their breathing and the distant hum of the city. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of her hair behind her ear, his knuckles gently brushing her cheek. The simple touch sent a shiver through her, a shiver of anticipation, not of fear. "Luna?" he whispered, his voice husky. He didn't need to say more. The question was in his eyes, in the way his gaze dropped to her lips. She answered by leaning forward, closing the small distance and pressing her lips to his. This kiss was different from the first one in the library. That had been a promise. This was the beginning of its fulfillment. It was deeper, more confident, a slow, exploring dance of lips and tongue that spoke of a growing hunger. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her firmly against the solid wall of his chest, and she melted into him, her hands sliding up to clutch at the fabric of his coat. The world narrowed to the feeling of his heart hammering against hers, to the taste of him, to the scent of his cologne mixed with the cool night air. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Can I come up?" he asked, his forehead resting against hers, his eyes dark with a desire he made no effort to hide. Luna's heart felt like a wild bird in her chest. She had never invited a man into her private space, into the sanctuary of her bedroom. She had guarded that part of herself fiercely. But looking into Asher's eyes, seeing the raw honesty and the deep respect there, she felt no urge to guard herself from him. He had already seen the most vulnerable parts of her heart. It felt only natural to trust him with her body. She simply nodded, taking his hand and leading him upstairs. Her apartment was small and cozy, filled with books and plants and the faint, sweet scent of her. Asher stood in the middle of her living room, looking more out of place and yet more right than anyone ever had. He wasn't assessing the value of her possessions. He was absorbing the essence of her life. He looked at the photographs on the wall, the well-loved novels on the shelf, and he felt a profound sense of coming home. Luna took his hand again and led him to her bedroom. The room was lit only by the soft, silver moonlight filtering through the window. It was a sacred space and he entered it with the reverence of a pilgrim. He turned her to face him, his hands coming up to cradle her face. "Are you sure?" he asked again, his thumb stroking her cheekbone, giving her one last, solemn chance to change her mind. Her answer was to stand on her toes and kiss him again, a kiss filled with all the certainty she felt in her soul. "I'm sure," she breathed against his lips. "I trust you." Those 3 words undid him completely. With infinite slowness, as if she were made of the most delicate glass, he began to undress her, his fingers trembling not with lust, but with an overwhelming wave of emotion. Each button of her blouse undone was a vow. Each new inch of skin revealed was a treasure. When she stood bare before him in the moonlight, she did not feel exposed or shy. She felt beautiful, seen, and worshipped. He shed his own clothes, and then they were skin to skin, his hard, powerful body a shelter for her softer, more delicate one. He laid her down on the bed and the world fell away. There was no rush, no frantic urgency. Asher was a man used to thoroughness, to paying attention to every detail, and he applied that same focused intensity to learning the landscape of her body. His hands and his lips traced a slow, worshipful path over her skin, discovering the sensitive hollow of her throat, the gentle curve of her breast, the soft plane of her stomach. He learned what made her gasp, what made her sigh, what made her fingers clutch at his shoulders. He was charting a new world and he was committed to knowing every inch of it. When the moment came for them to truly become one, he looked deep into her eyes, his own shining with a love so fierce it stole her breath. "This might hurt for a moment," he whispered, his voice thick with feeling. "But I will be with you every second." She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears of trust and love. And as he slowly, carefully joined his body to hers, there was a sharp, fleeting pain, but it was instantly washed away by a tidal wave of sensation, of connection, of a feeling of rightness so profound it was almost spiritual. He moved within her with a gentle, steady rhythm, his eyes never leaving hers. It was not just a physical act, it was the final, seamless merging of those 11 inches he had promised her. His thoughts, his fears, his dreams, his past, his future, they were all here in this bed being given to her completely. And she received them all, her body and her soul opening to him, giving him her own innocence, her trust, her forever in return. Their climax was not a frantic peak, but a slow, rising wave that crested and washed over them both, leaving them trembling and breathless, tangled together in the quiet aftermath. He held her close, his lips pressed to her hair, his arms a protective fortress around her. No words were needed. In the silent, moonlit room, their bodies had spoken the final, binding clause of the promise made in a dusty library aisle. They were now, in every sense of the word, one that the season turned, and the golden warmth of their early days deepened into the rich, vibrant colors of a committed love. Luna's presence in Asher's life was no longer a novelty but the very foundation upon which his world was rebuilt. His sprawling penthouse, once a monument to cold luxury and silent isolation, was now a home. A cozy throw blanket lay draped over the back of his austere leather sofa. The sleek, minimalist kitchen now housed a collection of her exotic teas, and the scent of her perfume lingered in the air, a constant, gentle reminder of her belonging there. They had settled into a rhythm that was both exhilarating and deeply comforting. Mornings were for shared coffee and quiet plans, evenings for long talks that stretched into the night, and their nights were a continued exploration of the intimacy they had begun, a physical language of love that grew more fluent and profound with each passing day. This new, solid happiness felt unshakable, a fortress built from trust and shared vulnerability. But a fortress, no matter how strong, can still be tested by storms from the outside world. The test came not with a dramatic crash, but with a slow, creeping shadow. Asher's most ambitious project to date, a multi-billion-dollar international merger that he had been nurturing for over a year, began to fracture. A rival company with cunning and ruthless tactics launched a surprise attack, threatening to not only dismantle the deal but to cripple Asher's entire corporate empire. The pressure was immense, a crushing weight that demanded every ounce of his focus. He was pulled into a vortex of emergency board meetings, transatlantic conference calls that lasted through the night, and a constant stream of grim-faced lawyers and advisors flowing in and out of his home office. At first, Luna felt the distance like a physical chill. The man who had given her all 11 inches of his heart and mind seemed to have retracted, his focus pulled away to fight a battle on a frontier she couldn't see. She would bring him a cup of tea only to find it cold and untouched hours later. She would wait up for him in their bed, listening to the low, tense murmur of his voice from the other room, a sound that was slowly replacing the soft words he used to whisper to her. A familiar, old fear began to whisper in her ear, the fear that this was the reality of his world, a world of problems too big for her to understand, a world where she was merely a distraction. But the Luna who had once been a timid librarian was gone, forged in the fire of Asher's complete love. She remembered the weight of his head and his heart that he had promised her, and she knew that a promise like that worked both ways. One evening, as he sat slumped over his desk, his face etched with a fatigue that went deeper than bone, she did not retreat. She walked into the lion's den of his stress, not with a complaint but with a quiet resolve. She placed a fresh, hot meal next to his keyboard and began silently organizing the chaotic piles of paper that littered his desk. She didn't ask intrusive questions or offer empty platitudes. Instead, she used her librarian's mind to create a new, logical filing system for his documents. She became his silent partner, his calm in the center of the storm. Asher, watching her from the corner of his eye, felt a lump form in his throat. In the midst of a war where everyone wanted a piece of his empire, here was someone who only wanted to protect him. Her strength became his refuge. When he was too tangled in legal jargon to think straight, she would read the dense paragraphs aloud in her clear, calm voice, her simple logic often cutting through the complexity. She was the steady hand on his shoulder, the reminder that he was a man, not just a CEO. With her beside him, the seemingly insurmountable problem began to look like a challenge that could be met, and then a puzzle that could be solved. He fought not just for his company, but for the future he was building with her. After a final, grueling 72-hour push, a new strategy was executed, the rival company was thwarted, and the merger was saved, stronger than ever. The victory was celebrated with champagne by his team, but for Asher the real victory was the look in Luna's eyes, the look of a partner who had stood by him in the trenches. In the quiet aftermath, as the last of the advisors departed and the house was finally still, Asher looked at Luna. She had fallen asleep on the sofa, a book open on her chest. The sight of her, peaceful and steadfast after the chaos, crystallized everything in his heart. He had offered her the 11 inches of his being, and in his darkest hour, she had held every single one of them with unwavering strength. He knew, with a certainty that eclipsed any business decision he had ever made, that this was the woman he wanted by his side for every storm, every sunrise, for the rest of his life. The promise he made in the library needed its final, forever seal. A week later he brought her back to the place where it all began. The library was just as quiet, the same dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. He led her to the very aisle where the biography of Plutarch had fallen. Luna smiled, a nostalgic warmth in her eyes, thinking it was a sweet gesture to revisit their beginning. But then Asher, his own eyes shimmering with emotion, slowly got down on one knee. Luna's breath caught in her throat, her hands flying to her mouth. "Luna," he began, his voice steady and deep with love. "A year ago in this very spot I warned you. I told you I was going to give you all 11 inches of my love, the distance between my head and my heart. You were the only person brave enough and kind enough to accept it. You didn't just accept it, you've cherished it. You've held my thoughts when they were too heavy, you've soothed my fears, and you've made all my dreams come true." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a stunning, elegant diamond that caught the light. "You have all of me, Luna. Every single inch. Now I'm here to ask for all of you. For every inch of your heart, your mind, your forever. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down Luna's face. This was not a billionaire proposing. This was her Asher, the man whose soul was now inextricably woven with hers, asking her to continue their journey. "Yes," she breathed, her voice cracking with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and as he stood to kiss her, the entire library seemed to sigh with contentment, its silent shelves bearing witness to a story that had found its perfect, happy ending within its walls. Their wedding was not a spectacle of wealth, but a celebration of a unique and profound love. Surrounded by their closest friends and family under a canopy of flowers, they exchanged vows they had written themselves, vows that spoke of 11 inches and a lifetime of forever. As they sealed their promises with a kiss, they knew their story was just beginning, a timeless romance built on a warning, a promise, and the unshakable trust that had blossomed in between. If you were moved by the journey of Asher and Luna, and you want to read more unique love stories like this one, please subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps us continue to bring these heartfelt tales of connection and forever to life. We have so many more beautiful stories waiting to be shared with you. The city was a giant, humming machine of glass and steel, and Sage was one of its most important cogs. He lived in a world of numbers, of silent offices with views that made people look like ants, of decisions that cost more money than most would see in a lifetime. Today his mind was a whirlwind of a multi-million-dollar deal, his focus so sharp he barely saw the people he passed in the gleaming lobby of his building. He was a man who believed that every problem had a price, and every solution could be bought. It was a lonely way to live, but it was the only one he knew. Meanwhile, across town, Rose was already having a difficult morning. The delivery truck had been late, and the order for the prestigious Sterling Tower was massive and complicated. She worked in a small flower shop filled with the earthy smell of soil and the sweet perfume of blossoms, a world away from Sage's sterile one. This particular arrangement was for a grand opening on the top floor, a spiral of white roses and deep green eucalyptus, and it was her job to get it there safely. She lifted the heavy glass vase, her arms straining slightly, and carefully made her way into the very building where Sage was preparing for his important day. The lobby floor was so shiny Rose could see her reflection. She moved carefully, her focus entirely on the delicate flowers in her arms. Each step was measured, her eyes darting between the path ahead and the trembling water in the vase. She was thinking about the customer, hoping they would love the flowers, hoping the tip would be good because rent was due soon. She was so focused on her own world that she didn't see the man in the impossibly expensive suit who had just stepped out of a private elevator, his head bent over his phone, his mind light years away in a boardroom. And then it happened. A collision that felt, to Rose, like running into a stone wall. It was a tangle of limbs, a surprised gasp, and the sickening slow-motion tilt of the vase. Time seemed to stretch as the glass met the hard marble floor. The sound was explosive, a sharp crash that echoed through the vast space, followed by the sad, soft patter of water and petals scattering everywhere. White roses lay like fallen snow, their stems broken, the beautiful arrangement destroyed in a single heart-stopping moment. For a second, there was only stunned silence. Rose stood frozen, her hands still shaped as if she were holding the vase, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked down at the ruined flowers, a whole morning's work and a significant cost, now a puddle on the floor. Then she looked up at the man who had walked into her. He was tall, with serious eyes and a frown already forming on his face. He didn't look shocked or apologetic. He looked inconvenienced. Sage straightened his suit jacket, his cool gaze flicking from Rose's horrified face to the mess on the floor. His first thought wasn't to ask if she was okay. It was to solve the problem in the way he solved every problem. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a sleek, black leather wallet. He extracted a few crisp $100 bills, more than enough to cover the cost of the flowers. "How much for the flowers?" "I'll pay for them," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any real feeling. He held the money out to her, expecting her to take it, to be grateful, and for the whole messy incident to be over. But Rose didn't take the money. A hot wave of anger washed over her, burning away her initial shock. It wasn't about the money. It was about the way he was looking at her, not as a person he had just barreled into, but as a minor obstacle he could pay to remove. She felt small and invisible, and that feeling was far worse than the loss of the flowers. She slowly straightened her back, her shoulders squaring as she met his eyes. Her own eyes, usually warm and bright, were now flashing with a fire he certainly did not expect. She ignored the money in his outstretched hand. Instead, she took a small step forward, her voice low but clear and sharp enough to cut through the quiet of the lobby. "Don't pity me, desire me." The words hung in the air between them, strange and powerful. Sage's hand, still holding the money, slowly lowered to his side. He was completely and utterly thrown. No one in his entire adult life had ever refused his money. No one had ever spoken to him with such raw, unfiltered defiance. He was used to fear, to flattery, to greed. He was not used to this. Pity? He wasn't pitying her. And desire? The word felt foreign and dangerous. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the determined set of her jaw, the way her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, the proud, unyielding light in her eyes. She wasn't just a delivery girl, she was a force. Before he could form a single word of a reply, Rose turned on her heel. She didn't look back at the mess or at him or at the money he was still holding. She walked away, her head held high, leaving him standing alone in a puddle of water and scattered petals, his expensive shoes getting wet, his entire worldview quietly cracking. He stood there for a long time, long after the janitor had come to clean up the broken glass and the ruined flowers. The words echoed in his mind. "Don't pity me, desire me." Who was she? And why could he not get her face out of his head? The rest of his day was a blur. The important meeting came and went, but Sage's focus was gone. He found himself staring out of his giant window, not at the city below, but at his own reflection, seeing the empty man he had become. Later that afternoon he did something he had never done before. He called his assistant and, feeling strangely foolish, asked him to find out which flower shop had been making the delivery to Sterling Tower that morning. It didn't take long. A few hours later, Sage found himself standing outside a small shop with a cheerful, painted sign that read, "The Petal Patch." The bell above the door jingled as he walked in, and the smell of flowers hit him like a warm, living wave. And there she was. Rose, with her sleeves rolled up, carefully trimming the stems of a bunch of sunflowers. She looked up as the door chimed, and her expression hardened when she saw him. She placed her clippers down slowly. Sage felt a nervousness he hadn't felt in years. He walked toward the counter, pulling out his wallet again. This time he placed a much larger amount of money on the counter. "For the flowers," he said, his voice quieter than it had been in the lobby. "And for your time." He paused, gathering a courage he usually reserved for corporate takeovers. "I would like to. I was wondering if you would have a cup of coffee with me." Rose looked from the money to his face. She was suspicious. This rich, powerful man wanted to have coffee with her? After their disastrous meeting? She studied his eyes, and for the first time she saw something other than coldness. She saw curiosity. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of regret. It was that flicker of regret that made her pause. Against her better judgment, and against the voice in her head that told her this was a terrible idea, she found herself giving a small, slow nod. "One coffee," she said firmly. "That's all." And in that simple agreement, a story that began with a crash, quietly started to bloom. The coffee shop Rose chose was nothing like the silent, sleek espresso bars Sage was accustomed to. This place was filled with the warm, rich smell of roasted beans and the gentle hiss of a steam wand. Mismatched armchairs were tucked into corners, and the low hum of conversation filled the air. Sage felt strangely out of place in his tailored suit, like a giant in a dollhouse. He watched as Rose easily chatted with the barista, knew her order by heart, and found them a small table by a window overlooking a busy, ordinary street. This was her world and he was a visitor in it. That first meeting was a careful dance of words. Sage asked questions about her work and Rose answered politely, her guard still firmly in place. He learned that she had studied business in college but loved the simple, honest work of creating beauty with flowers. She, in turn, learned that his life was a constant cycle of meetings, airports, and phone calls that never stopped. He spoke of his work like a general describing a battlefield, all strategy and conquest. When their coffee cups were empty, Sage, driven by an impulse he didn't understand, asked to see her again. To his surprise and to her own, Rose said yes. Their second meeting was in a park. Sage arrived, unsure of the protocol. Rose was already there, sitting on a large, worn-out blanket, a picnic basket beside her. She had made sandwiches herself, simple chicken salad on thick, fresh bread. Sage was used to meals that were artfully arranged on giant white plates, each ingredient chosen by a famous chef. He had never eaten a sandwich made by someone's own hands just for him. He found it was the most delicious thing he had tasted in years. They talked for hours as the sun moved across the sky. Rose pointed out the shapes of the clouds. Sage, for the first time he could remember, looked up and actually saw them. This became the pattern of their days together. Sage would try to share his world, taking her to a famous art gallery. But he soon realized she wasn't impressed by the famous names on the plaques. She was captivated by the colors and the emotions in the paintings, seeing stories where he only saw value. He took her to a five-star restaurant where the menu had no prices. Rose spent the whole evening feeling uncomfortable, whispering that she was afraid of using the wrong fork. She finally laughed and said, "I'd trade all this for a good slice of pizza right now." And so they did. They left the fancy restaurant, much to the waiter's shock, and found a small, noisy pizzeria where they shared a greasy, cheesy pizza, and Sage laughed louder than he had in a decade. Slowly, the walls between them began to crumble. Rose started to see the man behind the money. She saw how his phone never stopped buzzing, a constant demand on his time and soul. She noticed the tired lines around his eyes that had nothing to do with lack of sleep and everything to do with a lack of peace. She learned that his parents were gone, that he had built his empire from nothing, and that he lived in a giant, empty penthouse that had every luxury except for life. She realized his wealth wasn't a treasure, it was a fortress he had built around himself, and he was the lonely prisoner inside. Sage, in turn, was discovering the profound strength in Rose's simplicity. He saw the calluses on her hands from thorns and wire, and he found them more beautiful than any jewel. He learned that she dreamed of owning her own shop one day, not a chain of them, but a single, special place where she could know every customer's name and their favorite flower. He admired her stubborn belief in good things, her patience, and the way she found joy in a perfect bloom or a sunny afternoon. He didn't want to solve her dream with a check. He wanted to listen to her talk about it, to see the light in her eyes as she described the color she would paint the walls. The shift from friendship to something deeper was as natural as the changing of the seasons. It started with a touch. One evening, walking her to her door, his hand brushed against hers. Instead of pulling away, his fingers gently laced with hers. Her hand was warm and strong in his, and the feeling sent a jolt of something alive and electric through him. It was the first time in years someone had held his hand without wanting something from him. Their first kiss did not happen under a dramatic sunset or in a glamorous location. It happened in her tiny, cozy kitchen, surrounded by the scent of the herbal tea she had just made. They were talking, standing close, and a comfortable silence fell between them. Sage looked at her, really looked at her, at the little freckles on her nose, at the soft curve of her smile, and he felt a longing so profound it stole his breath. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. She met him halfway. The kiss was not rushed or demanding. It was a slow, tender exploration, a silent conversation that said more than all their previous words combined. It was a promise of care, a whisper of affection, a feeling of finally coming home after a long, cold journey. It was in that quiet, ordinary moment, surrounded by the simple things she loved, that Sage knew he was a lost man. He wasn't just falling in love. He had already landed, and his heart had found its forever place in the warmth of Rose's small kitchen. The invitation arrived on thick, creamy cardstock, embossed with the sleek logo of Sage's most important corporate partner, the annual Silver Star Gala. It was the biggest event of his social calendar, a night where the city's most powerful people gathered in a glittering display of wealth and influence. For the first time, Sage did not see it as a business obligation. He saw it as an opportunity. He wanted, more than anything, to have Rose by his side. He wanted to show her his world, not because it was better but because it was a part of him, and he wanted to share all his parts with her. When he asked her, his voice was uncharacteristically hesitant, bracing for her to say no. Rose's first instinct was to refuse. The world of galas and gowns felt like a foreign country with a language she didn't speak. But she saw the hopeful look in Sage's eyes, the quiet pride there. He wasn't asking a delivery girl to a party. He was asking the woman he loved to stand with him. So, pushing her fears down, she nodded and said yes. The week before the gala was a whirlwind. A kind but fierce stylist friend of Sage's helped Rose find a dress, not something flashy or overly expensive, but a simple, elegant deep blue gown that made her feel both beautiful and like herself. Sage watched her try it on, and his breath caught in his throat. She wasn't just beautiful, she was radiant. The night of the gala, the grand ballroom was a sea of diamonds and designer labels. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, and a small orchestra played soft, sophisticated music. Rose held onto Sage's arm, her fingers tight. At first it was magical. Sage introduced her to people, his hand a steady, reassuring presence on the small of her back. But then the whisper started. She felt the weight of stares from women in dresses that cost more than her car. A man with a cold smile, a rival of Sage's, approached. "And what does your father do, my dear?" he asked, his tone implying that was the only measure of a person's worth. Another woman with a sharp, polished look glanced at Rose's simple clutch and murmured just loud enough to be heard, "How charmingly vintage." Rose felt her smile become stiff, a mask she had to physically hold in place. She felt like a weed in a garden of perfect, cultivated roses. She wasn't embarrassed by who she was, but she felt the immense, crushing pressure of not belonging. She was about to make an excuse, to flee to the restroom just to catch her breath, when she felt Sage's arm tighten around her. He had heard every word. He had seen every condescending glance. And the calm, cool billionaire she had first met in the lobby was gone. In his place was a man with fire in his eyes. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His voice, low and clear, cut through the polite chatter around them like a knife. He turned to face the small, gathering crowd, his body positioned squarely in front of Rose, a shield. "This is Rose," he began, his gaze sweeping over the man who had asked about her father and the woman who had mocked her purse. "And before you ask, her worth isn't determined by her family name or the label on her dress. She is the most talented, kind, and strong person I have ever known." He paused, letting the words sink into the stunned silence. "She builds beauty with her own hands. She sees the world with a clarity that all the money in this room could never buy. So, if you have a problem with her, you have a problem with me. And I can assure you, that is a problem you do not want." He looked directly at his rival. "I am not the lucky one to have found her. I am the blessed one." In that moment, the last of Rose's fears melted away. He hadn't just defended her. He had championed her. He had chosen her, publicly and proudly, over the approval of his entire world. The crowd, shamed and silent, began to drift away. Sage turned back to Rose, his expression softening. "Let's get out of here," he whispered. She simply nodded, her heart too full for words. He didn't take her home. Instead, he drove them to the quiet hilltop park where they had shared their first picnic. The city lights twinkled far below them, a carpet of stars. The air was cool and clean after the stifling atmosphere of the gala. They stood in silence for a long time, just looking at the view, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. Finally, Sage turned her to face him. His eyes were serious in the moonlight. "You were right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That day in the lobby. You told me not to pity you but to desire you." He took a deep breath. "And I do, Rose. I desire your smile in the morning. I desire the sound of your laugh. I desire your strength when I feel weak. I desire your kindness, your honesty, your heart. I desire every single part of you. My life was a black and white movie before you walked into it and splashed color everywhere." He didn't get down on one knee. The moment was too profound for a traditional gesture. He simply took both of her hands in his. "My forever started the moment I met you," he said. "I don't want a life without you in it. I want to build a life with you. A real one." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple key. "This isn't for a penthouse. It's for a small, empty shop front on Elm Street. It has big windows for the sun and enough room for 1,000 flowers. It's yours if you want it. Let me help you build your dream the way you've helped me remember mine. Let me be your partner. In business and in life. Forever." Tears streamed down Rose's face, but they were tears of pure, unshadowed joy. She wasn't being given a thing, she was being given a future, a partnership, a promise. She took the key, her fingers closing around it, and then she reached for him. "Yes," she whispered against his lips before she kissed him. It was a kiss that sealed a promise, a kiss that held all their past struggles and all their future hopes. It was the beginning of their forever. Months later, a new shop opened on Elm Street. The windows were filled with vibrant, beautiful arrangements. The sign above the door, painted in warm, welcoming letters, read Sage and Rose. Inside, the air was filled with the scent of earth and petals. Rose was behind the counter, her smile brighter than any diamond. And often, right beside her, was Sage, no longer in a suit but in simple clothes, his hand often finding hers, his serious face finally completely at peace. Their love story, which had begun with a crash and a challenge, had blossomed into a life they built together, a testament to the fact that the most precious things, love, respect, and a forever promise, are truly priceless. If you were swept away by the journey of Sage and Rose, from a messy collision to a beautiful forever, then you won't want to miss the next story. Subscribe now to join a community of hopeless romantics, and be the first to experience the next tale of love, conflict, and heartwarming connection. Your next favorite story is just a subscription away. The city at night was a living thing, a pulsating creature of light and shadow, and on this particular evening, it felt especially alive. Down on the rain-slicked streets, taxis honked and people hurried to their destinations, their lives a complex tapestry of problems and joys. But high above them all, in a penthouse that seemed to scrape the underbelly of the clouds, a different world existed. This was a world of soft, golden light, of the gentle clink of crystal glasses, and the low, sophisticated murmur of voices draped in silk and tailored wool. It was a masked ball, an event where the city's elite gathered not just to see, but to be seen, all while hiding behind beautifully crafted disguises. In the midst of this glittering sea of anonymity, a young woman named Genevieve stood as still as a statue near a towering ice sculpture. To anyone who glanced her way, she was a vision. Her dress was a simple but elegant deep blue, and it shimmered when she moved, catching the light like a twilight sky. A silver mask, intricately designed with feathers that curled around her eyes, covered the upper half of her face. But the mask could not hide the profound sadness in her eyes, a deep, soulful ache that seemed to radiate from her very core. Her best friend Sarah had practically forced her into the dress and pushed her out the door. "One night, Jen," Sarah had pleaded. "Just one night to forget. To be someone else. Anyone else." And so, Genevieve had come, hoping the noise and the crowd would drown out the silent, screaming pain in her heart that had been her constant companion since her mother's passing just a few months prior. The loss was a fresh, open wound, and every laugh in this room felt like salt being rubbed into it. She felt utterly out of place. The easy conversations about stock portfolios and summer homes in the south of France were a language she did not speak. She was about to turn, to make her escape back to the safety of her quiet, lonely apartment, when she felt a shift in the air around her. It was not a sound but a presence. A sudden, intense stillness that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. Slowly, as if pulled by an invisible string, she turned her head. And that was when she saw him. He was not dancing or engaging in the lively chatter. He was standing apart, near a floor-to-ceiling window that showcased the sprawling city lights like a carpet of fallen stars. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his black tuxedo perfectly. His mask was simple, black and severe, but it did nothing to soften the intensity of his gaze. He was watching the room, his eyes scanning the crowd with a detached, almost bored expression, until they landed on her. And then they stopped. His gaze was not just a look, it was an assessment, a deep, penetrating stare that made Genevieve feel as though he could see right through her silver mask, through her fine dress, and straight into the shattered pieces of her soul. Her breath caught in her throat. For a long, suspended moment, they simply looked at each other across the crowded room. The music, the laughter, the clinking glasses, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. There was only the silent, electric current passing between them. Then he moved. He began to walk towards her, his stride confident and purposeful. People seemed to naturally part for him, a subtle acknowledgement of his importance, though Genevieve did not yet know who he was. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic, wild bird trapped in a cage. Every instinct told her to run, to flee from this overwhelming man, but her feet were rooted to the marble floor. He stopped before her, so close she could smell the clean, spicy scent of his cologne. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere but here," he said, his voice a low, warm baritone that vibrated through her. It was not a question but a statement of fact. Genevieve, her own voice a shaky whisper, managed to reply, "Is it that obvious?" "To me it is," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You have the most expressive eyes I've ever seen. They're telling a very sad story." He extended a hand. It was a strong, capable hand. "A dance might help you forget it for a few minutes. Will you trust me?" The word trust echoed in her mind. She had trusted fate, and it had taken her mother. She had trusted that life would be kind, and it had been cruel. But looking into his steady, gray eyes, visible even behind the mask, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, a spark of hope. This was a stranger. He didn't know her pain, her history, her name. Here, in this moment, she could be anyone. She could be the woman in the sparkling blue dress, dancing with a handsome stranger. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her small, cold hand in his. A jolt, warm and electric, passed up her arm at the contact. His fingers closed around hers, firm and sure, and he led her to the dance floor. As his hand settled on the small of her back and he took her other hand in his, Genevieve felt a strange sense of safety. The orchestra began a new song, something slow and melodic. He was an excellent dancer, guiding her effortlessly through the steps. At first she was stiff, nervous, but as they moved she began to relax into his lead. "Who are you?" she dared to ask, her voice barely audible over the music. He looked down at her, his head tilted. "For tonight," he said softly, "I am just a man and you are just a woman. No past. No future. Just this dance. Is that acceptable?" It was more than acceptable, it was a relief. She nodded, a genuine, small smile finally touching her lips. "Yes. That's perfect." They danced in silence for a while, moving as one entity. Genevieve found herself getting lost in the rhythm, in the solid feel of his shoulder beneath her hand, in the warmth of his body so close to hers. For the first time in months, the heavy, crushing weight on her chest felt a little lighter. She wasn't thinking about hospital rooms or empty chairs at the dinner table. She was only feeling the music and the man holding her. She laughed, a real, surprised laugh, when he spun her out and then brought her back in, a move that was both graceful and playful. The sound of her own laughter startled her. He smiled in return, a true, full smile that transformed his serious face and made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "There," he said, his voice intimate. "That's a sound I'd like to hear more of." The song ended and another began, but they did not stop. They kept dancing, talking in hushed tones about nothing of consequence. The music, the absurdity of the ice sculpture, the view of the city. He was clever and witty, and he drew her out of her shell without ever prying into the sadness he had so accurately detected. He made her feel seen, not as a sad girl but as a fascinating woman. Hours slipped by like minutes. The party began to wind down. The crowd thinned. The spell Genevieve knew was about to break. The thought of returning to her silent, lonely apartment was suddenly unbearable. The real world, with all its sharp edges and cold emptiness, was waiting for her just outside these golden walls. As the final guests said their goodbyes, he led her out onto a secluded balcony. The night air was cool and crisp. The city sprawled beneath them, vast and impersonal. He stood beside her, not touching, but his presence was a tangible warmth. "The night doesn't have to end here," he said, his voice quiet but intense. He wasn't looking at the view, he was looking only at her. "Come home with me." Genevieve's heart stopped, then started again at a frantic pace. This was it. The moment of decision. This was the line her mother had always warned her about. But her mother was gone, and the old rules felt like they belonged to a different life, a life where she was still whole. This man, this stranger, had given her a few hours of peace. He had made her forget. He had made her laugh. She looked up at him, at the strong line of his jaw, at the earnest desire in his eyes. She was terrified. But a bigger part of her was terrified of going back to the silence. She was tired of being brave in her grief. For one night, she wanted to be brave in her living. She wanted to feel something, anything, other than the hollow ache of loss. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she made the most impulsive, reckless, and hopeful decision of her life. She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers with his. She looked directly into his eyes, her own filled with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. "Yes," Genevieve said, her voice clear and sure, no longer a whisper. "I'll come with you." The world returned to Genevieve not with the gentle nudge of dawn, but with the slow, steady seep of consciousness into a reality that was entirely unfamiliar. The first thing she registered was the profound softness beneath her, a bed that felt like a cloud, its sheets of a thread count she had only ever read about in magazines. The second was the weight and warmth of an arm draped possessively across her waist. Her eyes flew open, and for a single disorienting second, she did not know where she was. The room was vast, painted in the muted grays and golds of the early morning light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. It was stunningly furnished, but in a way that was minimalist and severe, all clean lines and dark wood. It was a room that spoke of immense wealth, but not necessarily of a home. And then, the memories of the previous night came flooding back in a dizzying, heart-pounding rush. The masked ball. The dance. The intense stranger. The decision. The intimacy. A hot flush of mingled shame and thrilling remembrance spread across her skin. She had given him her first time, a secret she had kept close to her heart, a gift she had never intended to give so recklessly. It had not been a calculated decision, but one born of a desperate need to feel alive, to connect, to scream back at the emptiness that had consumed her. And in his arms, in the dark of his bedroom, she had felt all of those things. It had been spicy and new, an exploration of sensations she had only ever wondered about, but it had also been strangely tender, a silent conversation of touches and sighs. Carefully, as if moving too quickly might shatter the very air around her, she began to slip out from under his arm. She needed to escape, to find her dress, to get back to her own life before the spell was completely broken. This was the part of the story where the mysterious maiden was meant to vanish, leaving behind only a single forgotten glass slipper. But as her feet touched the cool, polished floor, his voice, sleep-roughened and even deeper than she remembered, stopped her. Leaving so soon? She froze, her back to him, clutching the sheet to her chest. She heard the rustle of fabric as he sat up. I thought it would be easier, she stammered, unable to turn around. The morning after. Is that what this was for you? He asked, and his tone was not angry but curious, probing. Easy? Finally she turned to face him. He was sitting up in the bed, the sheets pooled around his waist, his dark hair tousled. In the soft morning light, without the mask, he was even more handsome but also more human. The intense businessman from the party was gone, replaced by a man who looked his age, with a slight shadow of stubble on his jaw and a quiet intensity in his gray eyes that was now focused solely on her. No, Genevieve admitted softly, her honesty surprising even herself. It wasn't easy. It was a lot of things. He nodded, as if this was the answer he had been hoping for. Stay, he said, and it was a simple request, not a command. Have breakfast with me. Let's not pretend last night didn't happen. My name is Edward. Edward Sterling. The name meant nothing to her, a fact that seemed to both surprise and amuse him when he saw no flicker of recognition in her eyes. Genevieve, she replied. Genevieve Lawson. Genevieve, he repeated, and her name on his lips sounded like a precious thing. Stay. And so she stayed. He did not call a servant. Instead, he led her to a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a five-star restaurant and, to her astonishment, proceeded to make coffee and a simple breakfast of eggs and toast himself. It was a strangely domestic scene, this powerful man moving with a quiet efficiency in his own space, all while she sat at the massive island counter, wrapped in a robe he had given her that smelled overwhelmingly of him. They talked. Not about deep, painful things but about small things. He asked her what she did for a living. She was a freelance illustrator working from her small apartment. She asked him what he did and he gave a vague answer about investments and acquisitions, which she now understood was a modest way of saying he was a billionaire several times over. He drove her home later that morning in a car so quiet and luxurious it felt like they were floating above the pavement. He walked her to her door, a simple act that felt more intimate than anything that had happened the night before. Can I see you again? He asked, his hand gently cupping her cheek. Genevieve's mind screamed a dozen reasons why this was a bad idea. They were from different worlds. This was a fling, a fantasy. It couldn't last. But her heart, the heart that had been so frozen for so long, had already begun to thaw in his presence. Yes, she whispered. And so began a courtship that defied all of Genevieve's expectations. Edward was a man known for his ruthless efficiency in business, a man who scheduled his life in 15-minute increments. Yet for her he made time. He did not just take her to expensive restaurants. He took her on picnics in the park, remembering her offhand comment about loving the smell of fresh grass. He visited her small, cluttered apartment, and instead of seeming uncomfortable, he seemed fascinated by her world of sketchbooks and scattered pencils. He asked to see her drawings and he looked at them not as trivial hobbies, but as windows into her soul. He learned that she took her coffee with 2 sugars, that she hated the sound of alarms, and that she had a seemingly endless capacity for kindness even to strangers. In turn, Genevieve began to peel back the layers of Edward Sterling. She saw the immense pressure he was under, the loneliness that came from a life where everyone wanted something from him. She learned that his parents had passed away when he was young, leaving him a vast fortune and a profound sense of isolation that he had been fighting ever since. He was guarded, his emotions locked away in a vault as secure as any he might have in his corporate headquarters. But with her, slowly he began to open up. He shared stories of his childhood, of his failures, of his fears. Their physical relationship deepened alongside their emotional one. What had begun as a night of passionate, desperate connection became a language all its own. It was a way of communicating trust, of offering comfort, of celebrating joy. It was spicy and adventurous, but it was also profoundly tender. In the quiet darkness of his bed or hers, they were not a billionaire and an artist. They were simply Edward and Genevieve, two souls who had found a home in one another. One evening, several weeks into their whirlwind romance, they were curled up on the large sofa in his penthouse, watching the city lights twinkle on. Genevieve was nestled against his side, his arm around her, her head on his chest, listening to the steady, solid beat of his heart. It was in this moment of perfect peace that Edward shifted, his voice a soft rumble against her ear. "That night at the ball," he began, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her arm. "I thought it was just one night. A beautiful, perfect escape. But it wasn't, Genevieve. It was a beginning." He paused and she lifted her head to look at him. His gaze was serious, filled with a vulnerability she knew he showed no one else. "I don't want to forget you. I don't want this to end. I want you in my life. All of it. The messy parts, the quiet parts, all of it." Tears, happy and relieved, pricked at the corners of Genevieve's eyes. The sad story he had seen in her eyes that first night was being rewritten, chapter by chapter, into a story of hope and healing. "I want that too, Edward," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've never felt this way about anyone before. You make me feel whole again." He leaned forward and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that was a promise. It was a seal on their new reality. The one-night stand was gone, replaced by the thrilling, terrifying, and beautiful beginning of something real. The memory of her pain was still there, but it was no longer a gaping wound. It was a scar, and Edward's love was the balm that was helping it heal, making her believe that a forever kind of love was not just a fantasy, but a possibility that was unfolding right here in his arms. The world that Genevieve and Edward had so carefully built together over the passing weeks was a delicate and beautiful ecosystem, a greenhouse protecting a rare and budding flower from the harsh elements outside. For Genevieve, it was a world where laughter came more easily than tears, where the future began to hold a glimmer of light instead of a wall of shadow. For Edward, it was the first true peace he had known since he was a boy, a sanctuary where he was valued not for his portfolio but for the quiet jokes he whispered in Genevieve's ear and the way he always remembered to warm her side of the bed before she got in. Their love was no longer a secret, even splashed across the society pages in a blurry photo of them leaving a restaurant, him shielding her from the cameras with a protective arm. Yet, this newfound visibility came with a price, casting a long shadow that soon found its way to her doorstep. The trouble arrived not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a sleek, cream-colored envelope delivered by a courier to Genevieve's apartment. Inside was a single heavy piece of stationery. The message was typed, cold and impersonal, but its meaning was brutally clear. It suggested, in carefully venomous language, that a woman of her modest background was a temporary distraction for a man like Edward Sterling. It implied she was a passing fancy, a pretty toy he would soon grow bored with and discard, and that she was making a fool of herself by believing it could be anything more. It was signed only with the initial V, but the intent was plain, to make her feel small, out of place and unworthy. The words, crafted by a stranger who knew nothing of her heart, found their target with deadly precision, reopening the old wounds of loss and insecurity she thought Edward had healed. The familiar, cold tendrils of doubt began to wrap around her heart. What if the letter was right? What if this was all a beautiful dream and she was just too naive to see it? The fear of being left again, of having her heart shattered once more, was a monster that had only been sleeping, and it was now wide awake and roaring in her ear. She began to pull away. Her smiles became a little forced, her laughter a little too quick to fade. She invented excuses to avoid seeing him, claiming deadlines and headaches. She started to mentally prepare for the end, building her walls back up brick by painful brick, believing it was better to leave now and save herself the ultimate, soul-crushing pain of him being the one to leave her. Edward, a man who read complex financial markets and corporate rivals with ease, was utterly confounded by this shift in the woman he loved. He could feel her retreating, feel the distance growing in the space between them in bed, in the silence that fell over their phone calls. He tried to ask, but she would just shake her head and give him a fragile smile, saying she was just tired. He gave her space, thinking she needed it, but the space only allowed the poisonous seeds of the letter to grow deeper roots. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Edward, unable to stand the distance any longer, arrived unannounced at her apartment. He found her not working, but simply staring out the window at the gray streets, her eyes red-rimmed. On her coffee table, lying where she had thrown it days ago, was the letter. He saw it, and in a single horrifying moment, all the pieces clicked into place. He didn't need to ask who V was, he knew. Victoria Thorne, a business rival's daughter, a woman who had seen him as her rightful property for years and viewed Genevieve as an obstacle to be removed. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and knelt before her, taking her cold hands in his. "Genevieve," he said, his voice raw with a pain she had never heard in it before. "Look at me." When she finally met his gaze, her eyes filled with fresh, terrified tears, he continued. "You were going to leave me? Because of this? Because of the jealous, cruel words of someone who means nothing?" "I was scared," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was so scared of you realizing she was right. That I'm not enough for your world." A look of profound anguish crossed his face. "Don't you understand yet?" he asked, his grip on her hands tightening, not in anger but in a desperate need to make her see. "You are my world. That first night you didn't just give me your time. You gave me a piece of my own soul that I didn't even know was missing. You think I was the one who owned you that night? No. Genevieve. From the moment you said yes, from the moment you trusted me, you own me. You own my heart, my thoughts, my future. Every part of me. Forever." The word forever hung in the air between them, no longer a threat or a fantasy, but a solemn vow. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. Genevieve's breath hitched. He opened it. Inside was not a ring but a simple, elegant key. "This is the key to my home," he said. "Our home if you'll have it. And this," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper filled with unwavering conviction, "is a promise. A promise that I am yours. That I will fight for you, protect you and stand by you for the rest of my life. I don't want a single day to pass that I don't wake up next to you. Marry me, Genevieve. Not because of a contract or an arrangement, but because my heart will beat for no one else." The last of her walls crumbled, not with a crash but with a soft, surrendering sigh. The monster of fear was silenced by the sheer, overwhelming power of his love. The tears that streamed down her face now were tears of healing, of joy, of a homecoming. She looked from the key, a symbol of the life he was offering, to his eyes, which held the entire universe of his love for her. "Yes," she said, the word clear and strong and full of every hope she had ever dared to feel. "Yes, Edward. 1,000 times yes. And you own my heart too. Forever." He slid the key into her hand and then gathered her into his arms, holding her as if he would never let go. The rain outside pattered against the window, a gentle applause for a battle won, for a love that had been tested and had emerged stronger than any doubt, any rival, any pain from the past. The one night she had chosen to forget her pain had led her not to more sorrow, but to this moment, to this man, to this forever. They had found in each other not an escape but a destination. And as they stood there, wrapped in each other, the city humming its indifferent song below, they knew their story was only just beginning. If you were swept away by Edward and Genevieve's journey from a single night to a forever promise, you won't want to miss what comes next. Subscribe now to join our community of romance lovers, and be the first to discover new, captivating stories of love, passion, and heart-stopping connections. Your next favorite adventure is just one click away.